All right, so welcome to Restart Real Talk with me, Jason Tartick. I am wildly excited for today's guest, Erika Nardini. I'm going to have to take a deep breath for this one. So Erika is the CEO of Barstool Sports, which she has grown from a 10-employee organization to over a 200-plus employee organization, now valued at over $400 million. She is one of the most powerful women in sports by Adweek and Forbes. And now to add to it all, she's the host of her new podcast, Token CEO. Erika, thank you so much for joining us on Restart. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is cool. So the purpose of today's interview, like I told you, is really to get to know Erika, your career path, your life detours, and your brand at the core. I think what some people don't know is like, this just doesn't happen overnight. You just don't blink and then you're the CEO of Barstool Sports. Yep. And I want to know more about the brand of who you are, what's made you who, and your DNA. So if we take kind of like a step back, I was reading in New York Times that growing up, you were only allotted 30 minutes a week for TV. So, just in general, like that type of principle and other principles, what was instilled in you at an early age that's kind of like made you the person and leader you are today?
That's a good question. So I grew up in New Hampshire. We really split our time between New Hampshire and Vermont. And my mom was a teacher, and my dad, for much of my childhood, was a principal, high school principal.
Okay.
So when I hit middle school, my dad was the principal, which was a disaster.
That's a nightmare.
So that probably explains a lot. We always joked, my brother and I joked, we shared this half hour of television. So we both are good at negotiating because it was all about like, what are you going to watch?
What are you going to watch?
Or are we watching MacGyver? All those things. Like, what are we going to do with this time? I used to call the cable company probably from when I was like 9 years old. I would call and I would pretend I was my mom and have like MTV put back on. My mom was always like blocking MTV and I would like try to get MTV back on. But
that's awesome.
We like played sports. We spent a lot of time outside. But I think, I think New England's sense of humor, good work ethic. I didn't have everything I wanted as a kid. And I think that really drove me a lot, to be honest with you. So I would say those are the things from my childhood that I've kind of taken with me.
Now, when I look back more about some of the stuff you've done, another fascinating story about, self-starting and creating something is you were a sociology and philosophy major. My understanding is at Kobe College. I'm sure there's a lot of things we could get into in college, but one of the most ridiculous, crazy things I've heard about you is that at sophomore year in college, you had never played lacrosse and you picked up a lacrosse stick, somehow taught yourself how to play the sport, and then you made the Division III collegiate team sophomore year. So tell me like what that experience was like, and if there's anything from that of like picking up something new, then playing at the college level that you still kind of apply to your daily business life.
I played field hockey in high school and I played it in college, and my field hockey coach, who I loved, was the lacrosse coach, and their goalie had graduated and they needed a goalie. And she asked, I think kind of randomly, not expecting me to say yes, but if I wanted to do it. And I said, definitely, I'll try it. I loved it. I had the men's head football coach was the goalie coach, and he and I would get up at like 4:30 in the morning because field house time was so precious, and we would get up, and I basically learned how to play lacrosse. But it taught me a lot about, you got to live to the next play and kind of throwing yourself into something without a clear idea of what the outcome would be.
Sure.
I loved it. And I have taken a lot of that with me.
And there is just like no substitute to the continuity and the relationships you build at that level in a locker room. And those, to your point, those last a lifetime. Like those relationships, whether it's business or like just having like the foundation of your people, there's no substitute to that.
Yeah, it's the best. And I also think just the way you feel about a team, like you can create that same feeling in your workplace or in your friend group, and I loved it.
That's awesome. I want to take a couple steps back, though, to you graduate from Colby, and it's my understanding you started working at Fidelity as a media manager. So Fidelity, for those who don't know, huge financial services company, and you're starting now as a media manager. And one thing I noticed is that you had started, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you had started working on digital planning for financial planning, and this was in the 90s. So for those out there, like digital planning today is still something seen as like a little still unconventional, right? Like people still want to show up, suit and tie, go to the office and meet their financial advisor. So how in the 90s are you working on something that is really like that innovative and so futuresque, if you will? And it seems like that's something you brought to almost all your jobs.
I wanted to work in advertising. The internet was just starting and no one wanted to touch the internet because they were like, that's not prestigious. That's not like a stature job. And I was like, oh, I'll like, give me the chance to do that. I'll like fucking do that all day long. So there was so much that I loved about the internet that I still to this day love so much, right? Which is that like, it's boundless. Like there's no beginning and end of the internet. There's anything goes. Like there's technology and data and distribution and monetization, and then content takes all these different shapes and forms, and there's always invention. And I don't want a job that is like predictable. And so finding something professionally that wasn't habitual was good for me.
So then was it a tough natural like fit for you to go into corporate America and where it is much more regimented, right? There is more of the 9 to 5 and the certain expectations that kind of don't conform to your norms. Was that a tough transition from college into the work life?
I changed jobs a lot. I, averaged probably 2 years at most companies I was at for like the early mid part of my career, because I just would get either frustrated that nobody cared, or I felt like I've learned everything I could do here. I want to go do something else. The internet was changing very fast at the same time. And I like to just change things and make them new and try new things. So I'm grateful for that experience. It was good for me. I needed it. I was also afraid to start, if you look at Dave Portnoy, and starting Barstool, like that was ballsy. Like he had no money. He was out on a limb, taking a risk, and it's, even if it fails, it's just awesome to try something. So that's something I wish I would have done sooner, I would say. But in the same regard, I'm glad that I saw like how the machines work.
For sure. So there's this book that I always read. It's by Cal Newport, and it's called So Good They Can't Ignore You. So the premise of this book is essentially that within your career at an early standpoint, you should not, at least they suggest, you really don't pursue your passions. You need to create like this foundation, this skill set. Once you have this skill set, you'll then have the means and the wherewithal to go do whatever it desires. So from everything you're saying, from the outside looking in, it seems as though that's kind of the path correct me if I'm wrong, but the path you took. Like you worked for some of these large corporate companies, you then went in to build your own thing, and now you're working at what I understand is your dream job. Would you say that's kind of the path you followed?
I kind of felt that when I went to go work for Microsoft. I went to go work for Microsoft. I'd worked at a bunch of ad agencies, and I got a big break from Microsoft, and I felt like I had to take it. I felt really fortunate because I worked for 2 women who were very smart and very tough. Mm-hmm. And Microsoft at the time, and probably still to this day, has a very tough corporate culture. Like, sure. I didn't love that. I'm not really like, I want to do the job I don't like to do, tour of duty. I think there's 2 ways to go about it. Like you can either do, you could follow the right path, and then you find the moment when you explode or blossom into something you really love. I think the hard part of that is if you get too caught in the path. Like I've had a lot of people who've worked for me over the years who I felt like, God, if you just believed in yourself, you could go do something. If you took a risk, you could really explode onto something, and they don't want to take the risk. So I think that's the danger of that path. Mm-hmm. Then you have people who just out there, and sometimes the out there, it's hard to then fit into somewhere. So right. I think you just got to stay true to yourself, and like, what do you need to learn, and how do you need to be made better? And then how do you make those your own? And then you take yourself to another place with that.
For sure. So 2 big areas you hit on there is like kind of following the path of, I guess, what I would call as corporate America, and then taking detours to navigate accordingly based on what you're going to do, the risk you're going to take, how you're going to make something your own. So if I go back to the step of taking your path, there's so many people that are going to watch this that are in corporate America now. Like what would you say to those people that are saying, I can't be promoted because of the political madness in my company, or navigating the waters of bureaucracy in corporate America is too difficult? How did you do it, and what do you attest to that?
I think you have to not be afraid to leave. Some days you have to be like, fuck it. Like, yeah. I remember I had a manager piss me off. Like, so I was at Digitas, I think. They made me so mad. that I swore to myself from that day on, I was going to find a new job. I always wanted to do more, and sometimes people want to keep things small. And so for me, like, someone wrote me this on the podcast the other day of like, hey, I work in entertainment. I'm a lawyer. How am I going to make a difference? I work in a big Hollywood studio. Like, what's going to happen for me? And my thing is like, do you love your job, and are you happy, and can you make an impact, and are you fulfilled by what you're trying to create every day? And there's a lot of people who find that in big companies, and that's awesome. Like, power to you. And then there are people that find it in places like Barstool Sports, or like you, like going out on your own and making your own pod and making your own way and being really entrepreneurial. So I think it's all about where you find it. I think the thing where people get stuck is when you're miserable and you don't leave. Then you just become that person. And I think that's the worst. Like, I used to work with this guy who was so brilliantly funny. He was awesome. He hated his job.
Okay.
His computer password was get a job, and he would put a new number after every month. And it was like, get a job 43. And it's like, come on, dude.
Dude, step it up. Come on. And I think that relates to, path I took. I always thought of like corporate America as like, it was like communism. Like my boss was a dictator. I had to do exactly what they did. And once I had like the balls to leave, I realized that I left a company, and 9 months later, that company came back to me with a 90% salary increase from where I was doing the same damn thing, because essentially took the advice that you had instilled. Like, that's what you said. Yeah.
And the other thing is like, don't burn bridges. Like, don't be a dick.
Point.
Like, don't be rude or ungrateful or have a bad attitude. Like, it's very easy to leave a sour taste in somebody's mouth. Yeah. It's very easy to leave a company and then go trash the company. Like, that happens to me all the time. Like, somebody left Barstool, trashed Barstool, and then asked me for a job reference. And I'm like, dude, like, get the job reference if I'm hearing you're trashing us. But if you're like, hey, this wasn't for me, like, I'm going to go my way, you go your way. Like, I think there are ways to leave really amicably, that you can still leave that bridge and that door open and come back and do something bigger or do something together later, If you're burning bridges, it's usually always like ego driven, right? It's never like principle driven. And therefore you never know who will be the leader of what company at what time and when you'll need to knock on their door. Never ever know. Like, the world is so small. Like, it's truly so small that if you're going to go to war with someone, like, it's probably going to come back. And sometimes it's worth having a war, but like over stupid things like ego and pride, and it just all comes back, For sure. So one thing you kind of addressed, things coming back and taking leap of faith, and you referenced Portnoy having balls to kind of take the risk he did at the time he did it. What gave you the confidence to say, I'm going to go from the title, I'm sure the killer salary, everything else, the package associated with it, and be like, I'm going to go create my own thing? Because that's a huge change of pace. Yeah, I think I trusted the people. I trusted the person who was kind of leading the backstage thing a lot. Like, I really believed in them. I thought they were brilliant and had great vision, and I trusted them. I also felt like I had worked so hard to get to that CMO job. Like, I always thought that was the job I wanted. I literally, like, if you had asked me when I was 19, like, what job do you want? I would be like, oh my God, someday maybe I can be CMO. I worked so hard to get it. And then I got there, and for a year it was awesome. After that, I was like, I actually want to be doing something different than this. And that was hard for me, because I was like, this is what I thought I wanted. And for me, I really like to work. I really enjoy being at work. I just feel like it's so much of who I am in my day that I'm like, I don't want to be miserable or unfulfilled. You go from like having an office and an assistant and hundreds of people to being like, oop, it's just you. Like, people said I was crazy. And even to myself, I was like, I really messed up financially doing that. That was very stupid. But if I hadn't done it, I wouldn't be here. I kind of think that everything happens for a reason. And I also think it's good to take a risk. It's good to go try to do something new. There's a lot of really good things to take from that. And I think it helped get me to where I am now.
Yeah, like one of the things I'm hearing as a takeaway is like complacency just lives nowhere in your DNA, right? I mean, the minute you feel complacent, you're like, I'm done, I'm out of here, it's over. But the thing is it looks like every stop you take, you find a way to almost like saturate and take everything out of it, and from that build something to move to your next step, right?
That's a nice way to put it. Yeah, I feel like I really try to leave everything I come to a little bit better than when I found it. I try to learn as much as possible. I like apprenticeship. I think that learning by doing things is how I do best. And then I think you just have to be positive. Like everything you do, it gives you something new or equips you in a way that you otherwise wouldn't have been equipped. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Okay. It kind of ties in now. So you're at Backstage, and for everything I've seen so far, the Churning Group had worked with you guys at Backstage. Now, the Churning Group is the group who bought majority stake of Barstool Sports, I think in early January, 51%. So you're working for Backstage. January 16, Churning Group buys 51% of Barstool Sports. 7 months later, you're running the organization of Barstool. So what happened within that gap? How did you come to take on that role, and what type of relationship did you have with Churning that, may have led to that? What did it look like?
The Churning Group's awesome. So, Mike Kearns and Jesse Jacobs and Peter Chernin are, I love working with them. They've been awesome partners. They took a chance on me with the Barstool job. Barstool's really all about chemistry. And I think Dave and I just had the right partnership in chemistry. I loved Dave. I knew the brand. I was a big fan.
Yeah.
I had so much respect for what he and his team had created. I think I was the only candidate who didn't want to change it, which is weird because I was the only female. So it was kind of like they were afraid of like, oh God, if you have a female candidate, she's going to be like, this place, forget it. So I liked that. And then basically from the minute I got like fairly deep into the interview process, I was working on Barstool. The Churning Group shared everything that they had. They shared all their thoughts. I started talking to Dave all the time. No one was in New York. There were 12 people. The office wasn't ready. We were working out of like Dave's apartment or coffee shops or just at home, like on cell, like, and it's so weird now because it's, we've had 2 headquarters since then. We kind of had a try everything attitude. Like, let's just fucking go for it. Barstool's not a place that is complacent about anything, whether it's content or a joke or a type of show or a format or a person or a headline, whatever it may be. Like, we're all in on whatever we're doing. And we're a very, I would say, present company. So we're very like, what's right? What are we doing right now? And so we just, honestly, Jason, we just got after it. Like, it's been consuming since like the very first minute, but like utterly captivating.
Yeah, it's amazing. And like, in my opinion, when you look at the interview process and you think about the fact you're the only female, who gives a shit if you're male or female, right? However many candidates there were, how did you differentiate yourself? Like, if you had to look in yourself in the mirror, one thing that differentiated yourself and the whole thing that would contribute to the fact you landed the job, what would you attribute that to?
I think there were a couple things. One is that I deeply understood Barstool. I loved the brand. I understood the brand. I had a lot of respect for the brand. And they didn't have to explain what it was. I think for most of the other candidates, they spent a lot of time explaining what is Barstool Sports. Now, just to give perspective, like Barstool was much smaller in 2016 than it is now.
Sure.
So, one, I had a lot of respect for that. 2, I shared the same passion as Dave around commerce and around how do you build a brand? How do you protect the creator of that brand? I think I had a vision for how the monetization of the business was actually just a factor of like bringing great fans closer to great talent, doing things in a way that was disruptive and original and new, harnessing what they had, and then being able to make it transactional. So I think that was different. I think the third piece that was different is, I don't know, I just had a lot of energy for them. Like, I just was like, I had passion and energy. I had been places that they wanted to go. Now, I think experience matters. One, you have to be able to do things.
Yeah.
And two, you've got to be able to articulate why those things matter and how those things help the business. But presuming that you can do that, who cares what school you went to? Who cares if you went to school? Like, I don't care. I think that there's going to be something really big with young people in particular where it starts to be more like that.
My question to you is that the same Erika that's always been in the position since day one? Or like, and where I'm going with this is, how do you tie in being in like corporate America, which is so conventional and regimented, to kind of like now this new company where the success has really been derived from being an outlier?
Great question. I think I've always been the same. You know, it's just like playing sports in college. Like, you had players who were naturally super, super gifted. Then you had players who were kind of gifted and worked really hard. And then you had the people that worked really hard. And it doesn't really matter which way you get to the field, but
for sure,
you got to have one of those things. And so I think I've always been like that. I think I've built some awesome teams at a lot of really interesting companies. And, you know, there's something to be said for having massive, massive businesses. But I think at the end of the day, it just matters what you can do.
I love that you're like kind of breaking the process and that you guys aren't doing what typically has been done. But I still got to ask, is you guys are, I was reading this, I think on your LinkedIn, you're the 48th largest publisher in the United States, but somehow you have a wider reach than ESPN Digital, the Washington Post, Turner, and New York Times, but you're only 1/100th of the size of those companies. So I read that and I try and wrap my head around the fact in 3 years you had 10 employees. Now you have 200. Your value's over 400 million. You did the Penn acquisition. You got all the right players. Everything is moving in the right direction. And now you have your 100th the size of all these huge digital media companies. How the hell do you do that in 3 years? Like, what do you attest that to? It's got to be more than just having radical content. Like, what is it?
No,
it's
a lot of work.
Oh, it's just working your ass off.
We worked our ass off. Most everyone underestimated how big that thing Dave built. By 2016, how powerful that thing was. So we had something massive to build on. And the biggest gift that Dave brought to the table is that all Dave ever cared about was content and audience, period. He ran a very smart business. He's a brilliant business person, but he really only ever cared about two things. When everyone else in the internet, including people I worked for, all they cared about was money and traffic and arbitrage and syndication and all that shit. So the reason I felt I wanted the Barstool job so badly, Jason, is because I'm like, oh my God, this guy is sitting on this thing that is massive. It just needed to be open to, so I think that, you know, we worked incredibly hard. We have taken a ton of risks and pushed ourselves. We've made a process that works for what we understand how to do, which is make content for the internet and to distribute it across the internet. We've leaned into every failure we've had. We've doubled down on the successes we've had. We have really good talent inside of this company, both on, you know, social, production, business, you know, personalities, you name it. So I would say that's how we've done it. And then we just haven't gotten complacent. Like if you look at, you know, we're obviously in a strange time right now.
Sure.
You know, our guys and we're working hard. We're not like, oh shit, coronavirus, like guess it's a month off. Like everyone's busting their ass. So I think that's not to be overlooked, just as how hard we work.
So one of the things you've talked a lot about is Dave's talent, his, you know, ability to like found this company and some of the people that you have working under you. I loved this, the 90-10% thing you talked about, right? So can you tell me it's 90% of the people, you tell me what it is.
90-10. So I think that one of the things I used to be frustrated by this at big companies is that I think you have 90% players and you have 10% players. And the 90% players are, you know, you show up on time, you show up prepared, you do things the right way, you follow the rules, you're like a good corporate citizen, and you make the machine go, right? I'm a 90% player. I can make it go. And then you have the 10% people who think differently, who are usually far more creative, who don't go through all the steps, do all the right things, color between the lines, follow things in the right order. They just do it differently.
For sure.
And I think it takes a combination of both to make something really special and explosive. And I think very often in a team dynamic, the 90%ers hate the 10%ers and the 10%ers hate the 90%. In reality, you actually need them both.
Yep.
So that was kind of what I was trying to get to with it.
So would you consider Dave a 10%er?
I mean, Dave has it all. Like, he's an exception. You know, I think what's cool about Barstool is like we've made a system around non-systematic people. And so I think we have a lot of 10% people, what makes us so weird and interesting. And then we've put the right 90% people around them who understand how to build to what those people need.
So like you're interviewing these people and I saw an article that you will text people on the weekend, right? So my question is like, not even about the texting and seeing if they're accountable. Like what is like the weirdest story or thing you've come across when texting a potential candidate on the weekend?
So what was like a little bit out of context. So my thing was what I had said in it was, we work in the internet. Barstool Sports is in the internet. The internet doesn't give a shit what day a week of it is. If it's Saturday, we work in the internet and we work in live sports. Those things happen on Friday night, Saturday night, Thursday night, Wednesday night at 11 o'clock. Like we run pretty much a 24/7 media company. And the type of DNA that I needed as part of a team at AOL or as part of a team at Demand Media or Yahoo is different DNA than I need at Barstool. And it depends what role you're in, right? Like if you're in accounting, I'm not going to bother you on Saturday night. But if you're in production, there's a good chance I'm going to bother you on Saturday night. Gotcha. So, you know, do you want to be in a place where, one, people are going to be texting you a lot. Two, they're going to text you at off work hours. Three, there's a speed and a pace to how this company works. Yep. That I want to be sure in an interview process, someone coming into Barstool knows what they're getting into.
For sure.
And because I think that if they don't like that, that's totally cool, but this might not be the right job. And I think the worst thing that would happen is for me to sell something as something it's not. For sure. No, I think that's great. One thing I always give people career advice on, and you're a hiring CEO, so I'm curious your opinion, is your job as a hiring CEO, you see a resume, you get a short-term with person, but you're making a long-term investment. So I think like the number one thing you have to do is minimize your risk. So as a candidate, you got to go in there and do everything you can to absolutely minimize the risk of the decision maker. And I think my understanding of what you're doing, it's just qualification and making sure you're filtering through to minimize risk, right? Yeah, you're like, this is what it's like. This is what it's like here. This is what it's like. This, or do you hate this? If you hate this, like exactly to know, you know, good for you and good for me. Right. All right. We just have a few more minutes here with Erika. So I want to ask you, so Barstool, one thing about Barstool is you guys always seem to be at the forefront of like media innovation. And we're going through a very uniquely, changing time for everything. I think culturally, psyche, everything is going to change. How do you see this impacting Barstool and what do you see Barstool doing differently, especially when you think about like the Penn acquisition and being in sports gambling and not being able to, sports are being pushed off, the list goes on. How would you summarize it? We're okay. I think that we're uniquely positioned because we're kind of going back to what Barstool used to be like when there wasn't an office. You just had the ingenuity of your brain to make content. Everyone was kind of on an island in a different city. We have muscle memory in our content team to operate in a time like this. The second thing we have is, people who really care and who are going to build an engine to get the singles and doubles and get us through this time. I think, I'm an optimist. I hope sports comes back. We're working really hard with Penn to build a sports betting app. Right now, all the Penn casinos are closed. Like that sucks. So, I think we're waiting like everyone else for the world to come back. I have to believe the world is going to come back. But I think the one thing we have done is we've been really creative in the time that we have and really committed to being constant and creative and funny and out there in a time I think where people are looking for content more than ever.
It goes back to Dave's principles, content and audience. And I think what Barstool has done is just incredible to keep both engaged during this time. So before we wrap up, Erika, we're going to do a quick rapid restart refire. So I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. But before we get into that, one last question I have for you is anyone out there that's seeking advice as they're navigating their career or they're trying to get the attention of the CEO or someone like yourself within their companies, like high level, what would it look like? What would your insight look like in a few sentences?
I think you have to work really hard. I think you have to create value. You've got to help them in whatever their initiative is. You got to have an idea that moves it forward. It might not be the right idea. That's totally cool, but you got to have an idea. And you have to have the balls to communicate it. I get really frustrated in Barstool sometimes because I'm like, people just don't talk to one another. Like, just go talk to someone. Like, when I worked at Fidelity, I wanted to work in the advertising team so badly. Yeah. And I just wrote emails every day. I was like, here's what I know how to do. Here's how hard I'll work. I have 5 ideas for what you could do with the internet, blah, blah, blah. Like, there's no harm, no foul. Like, if you don't try, nothing will happen. So I think that, work hard at it, be thoughtful, and then speak up.
I love it. I mean, the whole part of Restart is to have lessons that aren't taught in the classroom. Everything Erika just said will never be taught in a classroom, right? Including have the balls to communicate. So, Erika, this has been so awesome. It's been great to get to know you more about yourself other than just the title of being CEO of Barstool and what's instilled in your DNA and how you got to where you are. But now we have a few more questions we're going to ask you to have fun with. I'm going to just fire off like 5 to 10 questions. Want your initial response. Here we go. Okay. So, number 1, what company would you invest in other than Barstool right now?
I'd invest in Amazon.
Amazon's a good one. All right. Who is a professional or mentor you deeply admire?
Joanne Bradford is the president of Honey. So she was a really influential person for me. I worked for Joanne at Microsoft. She had a massive impact on my career. So she's someone to know.
So when you worked at AOL, what was your AIM screen name?
Oh, I think it was like, I love Happy Apple. It was terrible.
That's classic. All right. Couple more. What Disney character would you be?
Oh, Ariel.
Oh, that's an easy. I like that one. If you could be an animal for 24 hours, what animal would you be?
Oh, that's a great one. I would be a blue whale.
A blue whale. We had an orca once. I loved that too. I mean, there's so many reasons for that.
Killers, though.
Yeah, that's what his point was. I was like, all right, that's a little aggressive.
Yeah.
All right, 2 more. So what TV sitcom family would you say you're from?
I am from like the version of the Huxtables.
Oh, that's a new one. I always go with Ross from Friends. That's my go-to.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. And last but not least, I'm a Buffalo boy, so I'm a big Buffalo chicken wing guy. When you eat your chicken wings.
You're doing good things with the chicken wings.
Yeah, we did a nice charity challenge. Cool. Yeah, appreciate it. If you're eating chicken wings, are you going with blue cheese or are you going with ranch?
Blue cheese.
Love that. All right. That's what we're talking about.
All the way.
Erika, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. For everyone that's inspired by your story, on your social handles and stuff, where can people find you?
You can follow me at Erika Nardini on Twitter and Instagram, and you can follow my podcast at Token CEO.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Restart Real Talk. This was such a pleasure. Thank you, Erika.
Thank you.